Well, welcome, Melissa and Carol. Thank you for talking to us here in Australia. Can I just get you to quickly introduce yourself at the start of this? Thank you. Melissa, you go first if you like.
Sure. My name is Melissa Eggleston. I live in North Carolina in the United States, and I am a user experience professional. I've been doing this work for about 15 years, and so basically figuring out how do we meet people's needs where they are, so they have a good experience with technology, be that an app, a website, some other kind of digital tool, or even just the services even around some kind of digital tool. And then I was introduced to trauma right around 2014, 2015, and I've been doing work for the last 5 years in helping make designs more trauma informed for people such as those who might have substance use issues or perhaps are suffering from an in midst of like interpersonal violence situation, people who have been survivors of human trafficking, for example, and other types of trauma like that. And Carol, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Dr. Carol Scott. I have a PhD in social welfare from the University of Buffalo School of Social Work, my master's in social work, and an undergrad in psych. I've been working with and thinking about and studying people since 1999, when I started as a person who wanted to be a police officer and had a military career. Transitioned to research and found my love for learning and research. I see research as a form of service and giving back. I transitioned from psychology to social work in my master's. I did my PhD in Buffalo. The University of Buffalo School of Social Work is trauma informed, so I've been thinking about applying trauma in my research and practice since about 2012. I am now a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Michigan in the School of Information. So now I'm taking my social work training and applying it into tech spaces. My research is at the intersection of human-computer interaction and social work. I study the impact that social media use has on kids' mental health, well-being, and substance use. And I now am looking at a part of the way of helping kids and the impact that tech has on them is realizing we need to stop asking kids to change their behavior and start changing the system. So part of the changing the system is a trauma-informed approach.
Great. Okay. So I'll ask this to both of you. Why should governments and not-for-profit organisations consider having a trauma-informed technology, including websites, social media, etc., and other digital products? Why do you think that? Why do they need it?
Sure. I think nowadays we have to look at technology as part of the system or part of the environment people interact with, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And since then, technology has become ingrained in our daily life. If we are working with and serving humans, we have to assume more likely than not they have experienced trauma, because COVID-19 was in fact a traumatic event. And if the technology and products that we're asking people to interact with are not trauma informed, we're adding to the problem, not solving it. So in order for any service, government or social work service to be fully trauma informed, their websites and social media need to be. It's part of a holistic package.
Yeah, definitely. Melissa, did you want to add to that or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in all throughout the world and in governments and nonprofits, we are seeing face-to-face interactions replaced by technology. But that doesn't mean that those interactions can't be positive and warm and welcoming and inclusive. But that requires some extra care, mindfulness around language, mindfulness around the types of technology and accessibility and things like that. But there's no reason it can't be good with a little bit of attention.
So what would you say the three most important things that need to be considered when you're looking at trauma-informed technology?
You know, Tracey, this is a really good question. And when Melissa and I first were pondering this, we were like, whoa, that's like, it's so big, right? So it's really hard to narrow down to the three most important things, but largely because it depends on the technology, the population being served, the people who are interacting with it. So it's a depends. But together we grappled with things that two things that we thought matter most, and that's safety and trustworthiness. So the first two principles of a trauma-informed approach. You can even think of, like, I'll take trustworthiness, Melissa, you take safety. But like the way I was thinking about it is, even in a human relationship or friendship or intimate relationship, that relationship will not succeed or work without trustworthiness and trust and transparency, right? The foundations of any relationship, professional or personal, begins and ends with trust. So to be trauma informed means you are trustworthy and transparent.
So on trustworthiness, can you give me an example of what that might look like?
For technology?
Yeah, for tech, yeah.
So that's a really good question. And I'll take social media first, for example, right? Social media, you can be trustworthy by emitting your, for example, let's talk about people who experience domestic violence, right?
Yep.
So you can say, like, we realize the court system might not be trauma informed, but we're trying to do it. And you own your mistakes. You own what may or may not work. You're transparent in your policies and procedures. You tell people what you're doing with their data, how it's being collected, and then what you're going to do with it. You admit to people when you've had a breach, because that's transparent, right? And you admit to people, oops, we messed up. Here's how we're fixing it, right? So it's just like in a relationship, you admit your mistakes, you admit your strengths and weaknesses, and you work through it together. You can do the same things on your platform.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one for websites too. So for example, websites can build trust. We know this from research with people, that by keeping people informed as to what is going on, right? So visibility of the system status can help increase trust. Doing things consistently, following best practices in terms of web standards, that also is something that increases learnability and predictability. That also tends to foster trust in people. Making sure your language matches the language that's used by the folks you're trying to serve, so that there's some kind of connection there of, like, they get me, I feel seen, I feel heard. Those are the kind of things. Those are just a few of the things that can really foster trust. The thing that's such a challenge, I think, is that it only kind of takes one experience to break trust, right? You might think a broken link on a website's not a big deal, but if that's like basically a promise of, like, I'm going to take you here to this resource, and when that's broken, that could feel really not great to somebody who has had trust broken over and over. It's like, see, you told me you were going to take me there, and then you didn't do it. So it's these little things that really add up and are important to pay attention to.
That's a really great example. Yeah, thank you. And what about safety then, as the principle? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I can start by just talking about safety, and then Carol, I'll toss it back to you. I think, so when we're talking about safety, we're talking about emotional safety, we're talking about physical safety, we're talking about all different kinds of safety. And safety is really determined by the audience, right? Not by, well, I think this should be safe. This website seems safe to me, but it may not be safe to somebody who's in a relationship with violence involved. It may not be safe to them if they don't have privacy, or if there's cultural issues going on, for example, and there's challenges around them even being on the website. I think it's a lot about the context. And that's part of being trauma informed, is that intersectionality and understanding where are people, what is the culture we're talking about, what is the context they're working within, and making sure that we're not doing something accidentally by the way we kind of set up our technology that might put somebody at risk for abuse or might be harmful in some way.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's a really good way to describe it. I went to a website the other day, and tell me if this is what you think safety is. And it was, I think it might have been a finance website, like a banking website, but it said that if you want to close this page really quickly, hit this button. And I was thinking about women, particularly women who are in abusive relationships. It shuts it down really quickly. So if someone's watching them, or would that come under that category of safety?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that in something like 99% of the relationships that have interpersonal violence, that often there's financial abuse involved, or economic abuse involved too, at least here in the United States. Some of the studies have shown that. So absolutely, that's a great example of one way that, like, you're even a banking app that you might think, well, this is just a banking app, but really makes a difference. Somebody might be looking for services in order to change their living situation, and that could trigger a real problem for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Carol, do you want to add anything?
Yes, safety it's also about appearance and so wall colors in a room, right? So there's a reason why hospitals are light green, because it's a welcoming, comfortable color. So you have to think about that when you're designing your website or using colors for your social media, right? Are these welcoming, comfortable, or are they triggering colors? Physical safety, if you're thinking like in a classroom or in a therapeutic sense, you never want to block the entrance or exit, right? So you want people to be able to leave. So that's what that button does, is it's an exit safety button. I can always get out of this room if I need to. It's key for anybody who serves LGBTQ plus youth, especially
Yeah.
as they're thinking of coming out. You need to be able to close that out. That's a form of safety. It's like you can come and go as you please and use this in a way that meets you where you're at. And here's all the ways we can help you feel welcomed and safe.
So the design principles that you would use in a physical space probably translate over into a tech space. Is that what you're saying?
In every way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that. I actually never thought of it that way. So yeah, awesome. All right. What things then should people avoid if they want to have a trauma-informed technology space?
So one of the big ones is if you're not designing mobile first or really considering mobile, that is a big problem.
You're talking about mobile phones, yeah?
No, I'm talking about mobile first for websites, apps, whatever you're creating, be it an online form, be it a website with just information, for example, that needs to be designed from a mobile perspective first. This is important because if you just kind of focus on desktop, which is easy to do because everybody's designing with a laptop or even a big computer screen, perhaps. So we tend to think about the desktop user, the laptop user. But the reality is there's many people, perhaps of lower income, who might just be using their smartphones to access the internet, right? And access some of these resources. So it also becomes like an equity issue, right? Are we really making ourselves available and accessible to all people? And it's hard to argue that you're being trauma informed if you're not thinking about equity also. So that's something to avoid, is avoid the kind of this focus on desktop or what it looks like when you're at your computer at work, and think more about how does it work for, the mom with 2 kids who's in a very busy area, or, another type of person who might be just not having the kinds of resources that we do who tend to make the websites.
Yeah, good point.
Or teens, any young adult, they live on their phones.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's in their pocket, it goes everywhere they go. So if you're working with teens who experience domestic violence, that's 100% of the way they're going to get their information and resources.
And maybe think about, because I have a teenager and he never answers his phone. So maybe think about how you use text, and rather than putting a phone number up, it's about how you communicate that way. Is that right?
Absolutely. SMS, meeting people where they are, making it easier for people, especially if they're in any kind of when we're talking about like trauma related to natural disasters or something like that. That's when like SMS phones become really important because people are not going to have access to any computers anyway, typically, if they've just gone through a hurricane or something like that. Some of the challenges people run into, I think, in general. So just always thinking about mobile makes sense. Also from a privacy perspective, right? Like we know people in violence situations may only have that, 2 minutes by themselves in the bathroom to look up some information online that might be really useful to them. We need to be ready for that. Carol, do you want to talk about the teams making the product?
Yes. So, we already talked about language, and I think as human beings, language is our most powerful tool. It can be the most helpful or most hurtful thing in the world. So aside from thinking about the language that you're using, I think, so you want to avoid victim blaming, those kind of things. One thing you really got to think about is doing critical self-reflection, or the people who are designing it to do critical self-reflection. What are you bringing to the table that you don't even realize that could impact your design? So a lot of research out there that talks about how technology is inherently racist, right? So you have to think like, what are my preconceived notions, biases, beliefs, whatever, And is there any way that's shaping unconsciously, usually, the way I'm creating and designing my technology? So we have to think about who's it being used for as much as who is creating it.
And I know it's changing, but the tech industry traditionally has been very male dominated. And
Yes.
so does that mean it's inherently sexist as well?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we know that a lot of the harm in tech comes not intentionally, but there are these biases that we just bring.
Unconscious bias. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. We just bring to the table and are acting out on it and don't even realize we didn't even think about like what it would be like for a woman using this kind of thing, or people in different kinds of situations than us, LGBTQ, for example, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Well, there are two things people can avoid, and if they want to find out more, they can come and talk to you guys, or they can do some research, etc. Okay. What impact then do you think a trauma-informed technology has? Why, what impact have you seen?
I think trauma-informed technology is as transformative as trauma-informed clinical care. I think it can be very powerful. It can prevent re-traumatization or triggering people, or some people don't like the word trigger, so invoking past traumas, right? Like it can prevent that. Like I just recently had a paper accepted to CHI, top computing conference, international computing conference. And that's basically what I said is imagine, for example, there's such a thing called trauma denial. It happens inherently. Our brains, as a way of coping, prevent us from remembering this. Now, imagine that the person is scrolling through your social media and unbeknownst to them is now triggered. They're reminded of an event they forgot and have yet to process, and now they have to do it on their own. If your website is trauma, or your social media or whatever is trauma informed, that person is less likely to then have to go through that. So I think it's life changing and in a good way, life saving.
Yeah.
Life saving. Wow.
Well, it helps the people. I mean, everybody's these nonprofits and governments, we're trying to help people, right? And we want to encourage them to take the next step, whatever they need to do. We don't want to be like overwhelming them, discouraging them, certainly not like re-traumatizing them, but you don't even have to be, it doesn't even have to be that severe to have somebody go, I give up. Like, it's not worth it. Right. And so like with care and things like progressive disclosure of information, being mindful of how we're presenting things, the visual complexity, things like that can really make a difference in just keeping somebody moving along the path towards help, wellness, whatever they might be seeking from your website. So it's things we have to keep in mind.
Can I just circle back? Progressive?
Yeah, progressive disclosure of information. So this is the idea that we don't overwhelm somebody with all the information all at once. And we do this when we teach typically, and we do it whenever we, know we're in an area where this person doesn't have a ton of information necessarily. So we give somebody a little bit of information, and then they have the choice to go deeper if they want, right? We then progressively disclose more information over time. It's not about withholding information. It's just about not giving somebody like 20 choices at one time, because that just can result in overwhelm pretty easily, especially for somebody who's gone through any kind of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned before, like if people have something on the website that might evoke strong emotions and might evoke trauma again, what about, do people then, if they have a social media page, have to be aware of the comments section? Because I think that's a really interesting space. Like I think people think, well, I'm just really good with what I post. I'm really careful about what I post. But it's not just what you post, is it? It's the comments part.
That 100%. And I love that you brought that up, Tracey, because so one of the principles of a trauma-informed approach is peer support. Well, what is happening in the comments?
Yeah,
good
supportive
point. Or harmful, right? And so it is our obligation, right? Like a social worker thinks, I have to follow through, right? So like treatment just doesn't end when treatment ends. I then have to make sure you're getting the services and stuff afterwards. So it's the follow through. That's part of the follow through on your tech. You are responsible for the content you put out in this world.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of
standpoint and a legal standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, so if people already have certain forms of technology, a website, social media presence, etc., what can they do to improve it so that it is trauma informed? So they may not be able to start from the beginning and do a whole new website, but what can they do? What are the little things they can do that might make a difference?
Yeah, I'll start on this one. So we actually just don't want you to throw out everything you've done and start something totally brand new, because that tends to be really jarring to people who are currently using the system anyway. And you're probably doing some things right. There are probably some things that are good, and we want to think about how do we make them better, look for gaps of where we're falling down, where we need some attention. So it becomes about doing some kind of evaluation. It could be called like a trauma-informed heuristic evaluation, some type of content audit where you're looking at a website and saying, you know, what is working here, what's not working here, what's our most egregious area that we need to really give attention to? Because there's usually one area that you're like, oh, this area is kind of a mess. This is a problem. Oh, I know this form doesn't work on mobile at all, or there's a bunch of PDFs which are usually not working well with mobile. So you can figure out kind of what it is there, and you can, you know, get people to help you with those kinds of evaluations, but you can start yourself by just taking a peek and understanding what would be trauma informed or not.
And does your website, or do you actually do some of that stuff, don't you? You do an audit for people.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say before
ahead,
Melissa
Carol.
jumped in. I was going to say, hire us. That's what we do.
Exactly.
We would never just, yeah, we don't design websites for you, but we are happy to look through yours and say, here's what you're doing really great, and here are some next times and things that we can address. So yes.
Okay, finally, what do organisations need to do to maintain trauma-informed technology? What sort of things do they need to do on a regular basis to kind of that maintenance part of it?
I feel like you started talking about it, Carol. You want to keep talking about it? You were talking about it earlier a little bit.
Yeah, like, so it circles to the, you know, you're already doing some things, and then once it's up, you have to, we were talking earlier before we started the recording, Tracey, we were talking about assessments and implementation in the process, and there's not enough evaluations. So you have to evaluate what you're doing on a regular basis. To wait a whole year to see if it's working is not sufficient. As it begins to become something new, you're constantly checking, and also looking to fidelity. Am I doing it the way that it was supposed to be done?
Yeah.
And just constantly checking and updating. Are the people I'm hiring following the rules, right? Am I hiring people who are trauma informed, right? It's part of, so we got this, now we have to maintain it. It's almost like you need someone that's their full-time job, is to make sure these kinds of things are being worked out.
Melissa, do you want to add to that? Is there anything you can think of that people need to do to maintain?
Well, hopefully, because in technology, there's this whole idea of iteration, right? That we're not going to necessarily get it right the first time. People in user experience, which is kind of my field, we know that. We know that, like, you put something out there, you then iterate on it to make it better. And we want to be doing this with our tech in general. And so this is like adding an extra component into that hopefully regular process you're doing anyway, where you're regularly evaluating, you know, are we getting the outcomes that we want? How are we measuring that? Who's paying attention to this? So that it's not like a set it or forget it type of thing. That's just not how technology works. And it's easy, I think, if you're kind of already in a regular cycle, to add in, let's look at this from a trauma-informed point of view as well. And if you aren't on a regular cycle for technology, well, then that's probably your first step, is let's go ahead and get on a regular cycle of checking in on things like usability, which is like ease of use of any kind of tech tool, and then adding trauma-informed in right away from the very get-go. You can be looking at things from a trauma-informed lens, as well as like an ease of use lens.
Yeah, we need to have a pair of trauma-informed glasses we pop on.
To your users, do regular usability, like user experience, and ask them, say, we think this is it? Are we right? What would you like to see changed, right? So sometimes we like to think we are the experts, but it's the people who are using your products that are the experts. So
absolutely.
And also testing with different types of people, right? So it's really that's one thing that I think governments, you know, because they serve everybody often, hopefully all members of the public, and nonprofits are also trying to reach different groups. It's really important to have those perspectives involved in the creation. Like that helps make things trauma informed, is getting the perspective and collaborating with the people who you are going to be serving, right? And it's making sure that on your team, you may not have people who represent the people you're serving, for example. And so you go, well, how do I bring in this perspective? How do we get that lived experience? How do we make sure that this actually, we think this might work, but we're not sure. And it's getting out of this idea of like it's going to be perfect right away, but it's iterating over time. Over time, we're going to keep making it better and keep making it better, because we're going to put it in front of real people and we're going to watch whether it's working or not. And we're going to listen to customer support calls that come in or emails we get, and we're actually going to respond and change. And
Yeah.
that is what we want to do here from a trauma-informed perspective, as well as just like a good tech experience perspective.
Yeah, good point. One last question before we leave. I want to circle back to the language, because I know that's something that people get stuck on and they kind of get hooked into. Can you give some examples of type of language that you probably would avoid and types of language that you want to sort of lean into?
I think that, again, that's going to be very contextual, because, for example, language that we don't use or we use in America might be slightly different than in Australia, for example. Like we don't say survivors anymore. It's people who experience, right?
Yeah.
We try to do person first, so you want to use that kind of language, right? People are people, so we don't call people addicts anymore. There are people who experience substance abuse or substance use, right? And so it's knowing the people, again, meeting them where they're at, like not just the people, but like the cultural in the area, right? There's a lot of literature out there that now talks about people who autistic don't want to be people with autism. They're autistic, right? So it's just knowing your community and meeting them in the language they like to use, using the right pronouns for people, and realizing that gender's on a spectrum and gender identity is very different than sex assigned at birth. And so it's keeping your finger on the pulse of the community that you're serving and in the area that your website's hosting.
Yeah. And one thing that I often talk about is being, I guess, being aware of the medical model language and utilizing diagnosis on your website or on your social media, and trying to steer away from those labels and being really careful about that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's
unless the community likes the label, like people who have autism, like autistic. There's a lot of people who like, that's me, right? Own it, right? So, but yes, it's not, having the strength-based approach, right? Instead of the deficit model matters too. And so using that language, like people are their own, they have autonomy and they know their strengths, and people want to help themselves. Don't do for, do with. Use that kind of language.
Yeah, I was thinking about something totally different around language, y'all.
Okay, good. No, that's great.
Like that it's just interesting how we have different perspectives coming from both tech and social work and psychology and that sort of thing. So I immediately was thinking about plain language and how important it is to write things in a jargon-free way, at a reading level that's accessible to most people.
Yes.
That's something that it's easy to forget, especially as, we have subject matter experts who might be writing on a website and they're just using language that's so common to them, but to somebody else, what are they talking about? And there's tools online to help. There's content writers who can help. We can help. Other people can help.
Yeah.
Just make sure that it's at an accessible level for everybody. It doesn't mean that everybody's not well educated. It just means that nobody wants to be like reading a journal article on your website. They want to just get the information they came there to do and get their task done. And then that can be done in a way that's welcoming, as Carol mentioned, like in terms of language, meeting people where they are, meeting them in the way they want to be met in terms of gender or whatever it happens to be, so that people feel welcomed, included. This site is for me. This place will help me. This is a good place to spend my time, and this is trustworthy. And that means keeping up with the times for sure, because when you look dated or you're using dated language, that's where the trust starts to erode a little bit.
Yeah, spot on. about inclusiveness, it's not about exclusiveness. And jargon is often about exclusiveness. And I forget in my field that I'm talking in jargon language, and it's not until somebody points it out. So it's good to get some